So today, I noticed a lot of your conversations and a lot of your talks today about around what I call the front side of pharmaceutical development. That's the drug development and the clinical side. For us, we're going to look more at what might think of the tail end or the pharmaceutical supply chain where the drug manufacturing happens. And so we're going to do a demo of the pharmaceutical supply chain as a graph. But as with all demos, I'd like to set a little bit of context here, because the reason why is what you see on the screen is not as important as what is realizing what's happening behind the scenes. What we're really demonstrating is the power of Neo4j as a graph database. The application what we're using is a very crude dashboard, but it's good to show some of the visualization of some of these capabilities. So before we begin, I'd like to introduce who we are, and we'll start with my colleague Yizhi.
Hey, this is Yizhi. I get training as a molecular geneticist in the US, and then I did some postdoc research in biochemistry in cancer biology, and then I joined the data science world and working with Neo4j for 3 years, and very happy to be here to talk about how Neo4j can really, a knowledge graph can help to solve and tackle some of the challenging problem in the supply chain of the drug manufacturing and discovery as well. Jeff, yours.
Sure, and my name is Jeff Tallman, and I'm more of the technologist side here. If you really want to stump the chump, just start talking in bioinformatics terms, and I will understand a word you said. I spent 30 years working in relational databases, mostly on the extreme transaction processing side of trading systems. The last 6 years, I've been at Neo4j. I've dabbled a little bit in data science and GenAI, but my strengths really around data modeling and Cypher and query performance. And as you notice, both of us are on the East Coast, and so where a lot of pharmaceuticals located. Kind of kicking in here, one of the things that I kind of noticed was last November, I was at the AI-driven drug discovery conference in Boston. And one of the common problems that was mentioned during some of the panels that were throughout the conference was the issue of data silos causing a lot of problems with drug discovery. And that's pretty frustrating. We heard that today in all your sessions, data silos came up. There's many reasons for it. When you're talking about supply chain, though, one of the biggest issues that we have is that integration. All of our systems have been developed to focus on particular functionality, and a lot of the integration between these systems is kind of I call it an exercise left for the student. So it's a very well-known problem. Our core business systems really just don't have integration in mind. Now, what we have noted, and this is a common slide you'll see from Neo4j, is that all these business systems have relationships between these different domains. And these relationships are not captured using those existing systems, nor are they easily implemented in traditional technologies. And it's not just the relationships that are missing. Frequently, these relationships have attributes as well, and these are missed as a result. So this creates a problem. And one of the things I noticed very early on is when you start looking at any sort of the analytical use cases, you can see some here like supply chain risk and patient 360, data lineage, and cybersecurity. Any one of these analytical use cases spans multiple different areas of the business and oftentimes multiple different systems, and a lot of the relationships in between them. When you take it a little step further, you start talking about knowledge graphs. Now, this is what I would consider a supply chain knowledge graph. And I noticed during the lunchtime you guys had when you were looking at the AstraZeneca replay, I think it was from last year's conference, he mentioned about 6 or 7 different knowledge graphs more on the drug discovery side. And there's certainly a lot more knowledge graphs out there. This is one that I kind of look at from a standpoint of the supply chain, is you have to look at the raw materials and APIs, the brands and the strengths in their packaging, the distribution partners and the pharmacies, the drug manufacturing process stages and steps, and also the equipment operators and training. So it kind of encompasses just about every aspect of the business. And it's not the only knowledge graph that I've seen recently. We've seen some what I call brand adoption knowledge graph. We start looking at the drug efficacy and conditions and diseases, along with different prescriptions of drug regimens and how successful those different treatment plans have been, and then some of the ad campaigns and HCP outreach. And of course, there's always been the drug counterfeiting, which is getting a lot more attention now, as well as the HCP networking. Getting back to the pharmaceutical supply chain, some of the goals and challenges that I've seen across several customers I've worked with on implementing a supply chain in a graph is obviously traceability, looking at from a product and batch genealogy standpoint, not only defect tracing, but regulatory compliance and production analysis where things are slowing down. Then optimization of cost reduction, that's a big issue right now as well. Looking at demand back propagation and some of the overstock shortage in the pipeline and looking at alternative suppliers and so forth, as well as cross-border redistribution and equipment optimization. And then from a resilience standpoint, of course, this is how you manage disruptions, both from a natural disaster as well as supplier shortage and so forth. Okay, so interesting side of this is it's not just the challenges are oftentimes interrelated. An example I like to use is during COVID, the demand for Tallman increased about 400% worldwide. And this led to an increased supplier risk, which could only be determined by analyzing the production of suppliers to meet that increased demand. So sometimes you end up going all through this different risk and challenges that people are looking for. Now, what we're seeing here is kind of a really simplified model of the typical supply chain graph, starting with the different layers over here on the right-hand side, with material types flowing down through the different station steps and down all the way down to the batches. And one of the things that should be pretty obvious is this is a graph problem. It's just a native graph problem. It's both hierarchical. It also has very long traversals. A single drug supply chain often has 50 to 100 hops, along with multiple branches. And if you display the whole brand on the screen, oftentimes you're talking 500 to 1,000 plus nodes on the screen displayed. And there's a lot of interconnecting relationships, especially you can see down here. There's even more than that in the database that we have. And so you end up with a lot of different relationships and different interconnections. As a label property graph, Neo4j is optimized to handle this. And as a native graph database, a leader in the market, we have a number of advantages that I've listed here. I'm not going to go into them, but I would like to kind of show you one that's kind of really emphasizes the power. And this is an example that I ran with a customer. You're looking at just starting off with a cipher down here at the bottom. I've seen people use Tinkerpop with RDF. I've seen people try to use Sparkle with RDF, and the query is almost incomprehensible. Here we see a very simple one say, I'm going to start from a raw material, and I'm going to hop down through this transforms to, from one to any number of hops to the finished good. I'm starting with a particular raw material, and along the way, for every path that I traverse, I'm going to compute, pathwise aggregation of total time for production, as well as looking at the reverse. If I have a, distribution center down here with a demand, I'm going to compute, what the raw material demand is, and along the way, I'm going to have this conversion ratio. And that was something somebody mentioned earlier about some of the things that we're looking at from a standpoint. And this returns, for every path, it returns the raw material, a finished good, and the total time, total demand. Now, this is very interesting. Now, along with this, what we did here is we kind of took a look at, say, a European situation with Eastern Europe and the war in Ukraine, and said, what would happen if Eastern Europe had a bigger impact? We ran an analysis, and we used the data science algorithms. So we ran it quickly in all shortest paths data science algorithm to find all the raw materials that started in Europe, as well as distributions ending in Europe. And along through that path, we computed out a between the centrality to find the most important components in the graph from a standpoint of the products that we had to work with. And with that, I'll turn it over to Yizhi.
Hey, thank you. All right, so today we're going to show the demo. And in this demo, we're going to wear the hat as a drug global brand value chain leader, someone who is responsible for managing and optimizing the end-to-end processes involved in producing and delivering drugs to the markets. So in this kind of persona, we're really interested in the following topics. First, we want to understand how our brand reaches the market in these various strengths and forms. So we want to know the product genealogy and the supply chain design. Second, we want to be able to analyze how market demand affects supplier demand across the chain. Third, we need to identify inefficiencies and figure out a room for improvement in the supply chain. And finally, in the event of any contaminated batch, we aim to trace its genealogy to pinpoint investigation points. So the data we use to build this demo is synthetic, such as drug names and equipment nomenclature, but the questions and the scenarios are inspired by real customer use cases we see at Neo4j. So this really reflects the complexity and challenges we see for actual supply chain operations. And this is like, demo is not a small toy data set. We're talking about 6 million nodes and 25 million relationships. But as you have heard throughout the day, in deployment, Neo4j can scale up to handle billions of nodes and relationships, no problem. Scalability is our strength. So now I'm going to start my day as the global value chain leader. So today, I'm going to look at this dashboard, which is powered by Neo4j. This dashboard has many tabs that allows me to investigate the various aspects of my supply chain operation. So for example, the supply chain tab, it provides a high-level overview of the entire value chain, including the global brands, the market, and distributors. And the RM demand helps me to assess raw materials requirements based on the current and projected market needs. And asset optimization tab is a place to identify bottlenecks and opportunities for supply chain improvements. Batch traceability is very critical for me to identify lineage of batches and tracing any issues such as contamination. And this is where we can easily integrate to GenAI as an example to help us to sort out some of the root cause. And equipment utilization is focus on the capacity and efficiency of manufacturing equipment. And I'm going to go over the first three tabs and pass over the remaining two to Jeff, to my teammate Jeff Tallman. So you can see here, we're going to focus on the supply chain tab. And today I want to drill down to look at one specific brand, which is alcohol SCAT. And you can, this is drop down menu, you can pick any brand you are interested. And in caplet format and in 50 milligram strength, G2 generation. If we plot the demand of this particular SKU on the map, we can see a lot of the demand are coming from the European region. We have lots of patches of dark green here. And with the top distributor, the distributor with the top demand is Western Europe distributor. So in this case, I really want to make sure the supply chain to reach to that very important distributor is resilient. And this is very easy for me to do when data is modeled in Neo4j. So here, I'm looking at the supply chain to the final distributor, Western Europe distributor. And you can see Neo4j models data as entities. Neo4j models label property graph models data as entities and relationships. So we can view all the steps and dependencies in a very intuitive way. So this level of visibility is invaluable in a supply chain context, and it's very hard to get without using a graph database like Neo4j. So let's take a closer look at this chain. And of course, it starts with a recipe, followed by a group of red nodes, which is the representing the active pharmaceutical ingredients API synthesis, followed by drug products processing, followed by bulk processing, and then finishing goods. And finishing goods go through two packaging routes. Some of the finished goods are packaged as blister pack. Some of them are packaged as bottle. And then these two packaging flow converge into an intermediate distribution center, going through different routes and reaching the same final distributor. So here you can see we're only looking at one SKU reaching to one distributor. We're already seeing more than 45 steps, as Jeff said. A lot of those manufacturing has more than 50 hops. So we're looking at more than 45 steps here with multiple splitting and merging along the chain. Imagine the complexity if you need to manage hundreds or thousands of SKU across thousands of distributors. So that complexity is very, very challenging to handle if you model your data in the traditional relational database, because this database very struggle with dynamic relationships, deep hierarchy like this, and recursive queries. But Neo4j's native graph database really enable the fast, deep traversal over connected data at scale. So I have all the insights at my fingertips. So that's nice to have this visibility. But also another area of my job is to make sure there's no vulnerability, no risk in this chain that can cause disruption of the drug manufacturing. To get that insights, I need to be able to access the raw materials and suppliers data as well. And Neo4j makes it super easy. I can just click on the product and then use a scene action to bring the raw material and suppliers. And here, I have brought all the raw materials. Those are the green nodes involved required in this chain, and also the corresponding suppliers, which is the dark red nodes. For example, this supplier, Super Pharma Solution, offers raw materials for the API synthesis at this particular steps. And drug manufacturing is a very complicated process. For this SKU, we're looking at 35 distributors. 35 suppliers. So in this case, I want to ask, so are there any risk associated with these suppliers? Is this supply chain really depend on one or two key suppliers? that I have so much dependency, and if any disruption from their end, that will cause a triple effect in my supply chain. In today's volatile trading environment with the tariff going on off all the time, that is a really situation I want to avoid. I want to diversify my sourcing strategy to minimize that kind of risk. So to understand who is the key suppliers in this chain, I can leverage Neo4j's graph analytics. Neo4j graph analytics offers more than 60 off-the-shelf graph algorithms that can help us to analyze the graph, to help us identify important nodes such as critical suppliers, to help us understand the hidden path, and all of these good things. Now I can just run a graph algorithm. In this case, I'll just run a degree centrality algorithm that can help me to identify important suppliers based on the number of raw materials they offer in this supply chain. I'm going to run the algorithm. And now let's see the results. So this algorithm will give the important supplier a very dark green color. And you can see here, this particular supplier, Chengdu Biolabs, it supplies lots of raw materials across many steps in this chain. So it's very important. And I know this supplier is based in Chengdu, China. And given this tricky tariff situation going on there, I really want to get ahead of the game to identify alternative suppliers to meet with my demands here. So that's one thing to do on my list. All right. So now let's move on to switching gears to talk about how I can look at the raw material demand. So I'm going to switch gears to the RM demand tab. So this tab has two tables. The first one show me of this particular brand and each SKU under this brand, the demand quantities from the market. So for example, if I say, hey, this particular SKU with 5F55 has a market demand about 115,000, right? So what this does, you can see this every time I click on the SKU, this triggers an automatic update of the table below. So this table below gave me the quantity of the raw materials needed in order to meet that market demand for that particular SKU. So for this SKU, I need, for example, a lot of the raw material from the Alliance Pharmaceutics. So don't underestimate this simple table here. It looks simple, but actually this is impossible for us to get before we model our data using Neo4j. As Jeff said, this will really requires the database to traverse through the deep chain, which I showed you more than 46 steps, and make pathwise aggregation. That is a very challenging and computational expensive task to do if you don't model data using Neo4j. But now with Neo4j, in my everyday work, my team is using this approach to analyze hundreds of SKUs across 40 brands. So I know I will always have enough raw materials to meet all the specific market demands. And the third thing I want to look at is the assay optimization. And that is where I can identify if there's anything I can improve in my supply chain. And this tab has two parts. The top one focus on any inefficiency in the shipping. So Neo4j surfaced two inefficient shipping patterns here. So number one is the cross-border shipments. You can see we have 10 accounts of that. That means a drug gets shipped across the border and coming back. So this does not only add logistic complexity, but also adds regulatory cost. And the second inefficiency is the cyclic movement, where you can see from the name, the drug just move across circles. That you may want to ask why. Is there any way we can minimize that, right? Because this is adding shipping cost. So Neo4j can easily surface this kind of inefficient patterns, and it can even pinpoint exact location where such patterns happen. So I can drill down to the shipping details and really see if I can minimize such circular movements. And the bottom part of the tab, we're looking at any bottleneck in these processing steps. The database traverses across all the processing stages to identify if there's any bottleneck here. So I'm going to bring up more rows here. So here you can see it shows at even which location, what is the processing holding us back. So for example, in this several location, the staging from bulking, packaging, and distribution has seen a huge delay, where the target duration is 3 days, but we're seeing on average anywhere between 7 to 6 days. So That's like double the time we want it to be done. And we can say, okay, if it's bulk packaging, I want to drill down to say what is the exact step is holding me back. So here, that's what this bottom one shows us. So I'm just gonna click on here. This is now I'm trying to, okay, bulk packaging. So you can see once I click on that, we can say the steps that is holding us back is QC hold and QC check. So this could indicate a lot of like out of trend errors or could be lack of documentation. So anyway, I can contact my field location team and point out the delay and then offer some like, guidance there as well. So far I've gone through 3 tabs, powered by Neo4j, and have 3 things to do on my list to move on with my day. And now I'm going to pass this task, continue investigation to my teammate, Jeff Tallman. Jeff, do you mind share your screen to continue this investigation?
Just pointing out the first 3, and I'm going to look at the batch traceability, looking at a problem, which is typically if you have a defect that happens and it's noticed in the market. In this case, we looked between 2 dates, and we looked at 2 different batches that there have been defects reported among these different distributors. And one of the things we noticed here is we ran this through an LLM from the results, and the results came back in the table, which you can see here, but we also ran it through an LLM because LLMs are more than useful just for doing ad hoc querying for data or doing entity resolution or entity extraction, entity relationship extraction. It also makes a good way to actually amalgamate the data or put it back into English. In this case, we can see right off the bat, it points out that there's a couple of employees that are involved in multiple processes, as well as the fact that there's one piece of shared equipment. And so, it quickly says, hey, there might be some training issues with these 2 people, or there might be a cross-contamination, and that there's some shared equipment. And it'd be difficult just looking at this table to notice that. So we also notice down here at the bottom, we get a real quick graph of these particular systems and the raw materials and so forth that went into it, to all the way down to the distributors at the end. In the interest of time, I'm going to go to the next tab, which is equipment utilization. And here we're going to take a look at a particular site like Boston, and then we're going to look between 2 dates. And again, quick switch to a little more data here. And this shows all the different equipment and the manufacturer and the models that are used for any drug within the chain for these particular dates. And I can look at, for example, I can look at these 2 pieces of equipment here, which seem to be the same model number. And down at the bottom here, I just use a Gantt chart. You could probably do this with a timeline chart or whatever else. We notice right off the bat, there's just a little bit of time where there might be some overlap, but otherwise, the equipment probably could be repurposed for another drug manufacturing chain or something else, or maybe if I'm leasing that piece of equipment, I can take it off. And so with that, I'm going to quickly go back to the recap slides. And so one of the things that we talked about here is, from a traceability, cost optimization, and resilience standpoint, we showed that we had the multi-level insights from both the product and batch genealogies, long traversals and real deep traversals and aggregation, along with calculating raw materials for tracing demand. And then we also showed some advanced graph analytics that Yizhi is showing with some of the data science stuff that and showing the most important suppliers that could be a problem and so forth. So in the interest of time, I'm going to quickly go here to if there's any questions. Our email's here on this slide as well.
Thank you for the great presentation, Jeff and Yizhi. Is there a question? So a round of applause first.